So far tonight, we've talked about the origins of the Wendigo, the horrific hunger, the cultural taboos, the chilling eyewitness accounts, and its eerie persistence into the modern world. But now I want to ask the question that's lingered beneath this whole episode. What happens when someone doesn't just see the Wendigo, but becomes one, and how do we understand that transformatio?
This is where it gets really disturbing, because unlike a lot of creatures in folklore that attack from the outside, the Wendigo is often about what happens inside a person. It's not just a monster in the woods, it's a disease of the soul, a possession, a breakdown, a horror that lives in the bones, and, in the old stories, the Wendigo is born when someone crosses a sacred boundary, usually in extreme conditions: starvation, isolation, betrayal.
You've mentioned before that cannibalism is the most obvious line, the one we always associate with the Wendigo, but it's not the only way, right?
That's right. Cannibalism is a kind of spiritual rupture, a symbolic act that says, I've turned my back on the community, and in that moment, the Wendigo takes root. But it doesn't have to be about literal flesh. In many interpretations, it can be greed, exploitation, emotional consumption. It's the act of taking more than you need, of feeding on others in any form, and that's when the Wendigo spirit takes hold.
So this is where it really becomes psychological. It's not just horror in the dark, it's horror in the mirror.
Exactly, and I want to read you something. This is from an Ojib welder I interviewed years ago, and I've never forgotten his words. He said, "The Wendigo is not a ghost in the woods, it's a shadow that grows from your own feet. And when you feed it, it doesn't leave, it wears you."
God, that's terrifying, because it suggests that any of us, under the right circumstances, or maybe the wrong ones, could become something monstrous.
Yes, and this is what makes the Wendigo so uniquely haunting. It's not a creature you fight with weapons, it's a hunger you can't escape. And some traditions even say once you become a Wendigo, there's no going back, that your soul is devoured, that your humanity is a distant echo, but others believe redemption is possible. If you confront the hunger, resist it, purify yourself, you can break the cycle, but it takes immense spiritual strength.
Have you ever heard of people claiming they were Wendigos or were becoming one?
Yes, and those are the hardest interviews I've ever done, because you're not talking to someone describing a creature they saw, you're talking to someone who's afraid of themselves. One man told me he lived through a winter alone in northern Manitoba, ran out of supplies, hallucinated a voice telling him to kill, and he started seeing things in the trees, something gaunt with his own face. He said it smiled at him every night until he left the cabin and burned everything he owned.
That sounds less like folklore and more like madness, but that's the terrifying overlap here. Right, the Wendigo isn't just supernatural, it's psychological. It's a story we tell to explain what happens when people break under pressure, under isolation, under greed.
It is, and it's no accident that a lot of Wendigo stories come from harsh winters, from places where survival is brutal, because those are the places that push people to their limits. And when people break, when their spirit fractures, they need a name for that feeling, they need something to explain what they've become.
Which brings us to the most disturbing idea of all, the Wendigo is still becoming, every day, in different ways, in new forms, maybe not with antlers and fangs, but in behavior, in systems, in the way we consume everything, from nature to each other.
That's why the myth persists, Mark, because it's not locked in the past, it's evolving with us, reflecting back our darkest instincts, and when people say they hear its voice, I believe them. Not because there's necessarily a creature lurking in the woods, but because the hunger they're describing is real, and hunger always has a voice.
There's this old Algonquian proverb that says, "To name the Wendigo is to risk its gaze." And after tonight, I understand that a little better. We've named it, talked about it, pulled it out of the shadows, and yet, somehow, I don't feel any safer.
You're not supposed to. That's the whole point. The Wendigo is a warning, a red light on the edge of the map, not to scare you, but to remind you of where the line is and what happens when you cross it.
Sarah, as always, you've brought more insight than I know what to do with, and more chills than I know how to shake off. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and to everyone listening, be careful where you walk, and even more careful what you hunger for.
That's it for tonight's episode of The Unseen Are. We've walked the edge of myth and madness, looked into the eyes of the Wendigo, and maybe, just maybe, caught a glimpse of ourselves staring back. Until next time, stay in the light.